Unbroken, healing through storytelling.
Today, my guest is Nikki Bush. She is a human potential and parenting expert, and she empowers individuals, families, and teams in businesses and education to win at work, home, and life. She has the knack of putting difficult, complex, and sensitive topics on the tables, often one that we prefer to avoid, and making them accessible. Nikki is an award-winning speaker, having been inducted into the Speakers Hall of Fame in 2019, the first woman in South Africa to ever receive this Lifetime Achievement Award, and was recognized in the same year by the Ford Motor Company as one of their Women with Drive. Nikki speaks with energy, passion, self-deprecating humor, and a disarming honesty and vulnerability. Future-Proof Yourself, her book on dancing with disruption, was published in July 2021. She has authored a number of best-selling parenting books with major publishers, including Future-Proof Your Child for the 20s and beyond, and has fielded over 3,000 media interviews in the past 15 years. Hello, Nikki, and welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
So wonderful to be with you, Madeleine.
It's great to be with you. So I think I met Nikki when you were awarded the Speakers Hall of Fame award, the only woman in South Africa, back in 2019 in Johannesburg, when I don't know if I want to say the pleasure of hearing you speak, because it was very, very powerful speech that you gave. And you were a speaker before, but I believe it was the first time you shared your story with your peers. We were both speaking at a speakers conference.
That's right, Madeleine. It was the first time that I had given I think I called it at the time, was it What If Happens?
Yes.
Or was it 6 minutes that changed my life?
Yes.
But really it was the story of the 6 minutes that changed my life. And as you know, and as many of your listeners know who've been through traumatic incidents, it takes time to process very complex, very messy things and put them into a linear presentation. It's not an easy thing to do, to put them into a book, to put them into a presentation, because they really are so multifaceted. And to drill down into those stories, firstly, you've got to face your demons and you've got to relive everything that you went through. But secondly, to find a way to tell your story so that it has teachable moments and it's not just a horror story.
Yes.
There is an art and a skill in that, and that takes time.
You did it very well. So before we get into the 6 minutes that changed your life, because the show is called Unbroken, I always ask all of my guests the same very first question is, what does the word unbroken mean to you?
So I believe that sometimes life sends us life tremors, warnings, and occasionally it sends us life quakes. And those really have the potential power to bury us as victims or to break us open and plant us like a seed. And there's a very big difference between the two. And if you choose the victim route, because I do think there is choice here, you can reach a full stop in your life and be frozen in time, in that moment when the trauma occurred. And if you allow yourself to be broken open, it's a very, very different story, because you are able to see, and it's not immediate, over time, you're able to see the collateral beauty in the collateral damage, to see, those little lights, that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that there are doors and windows that are opening that actually were never there before. Because if you're broken open and you become bigger than you were before because of your trauma, more multifaceted, and you are on a journey of discovery, and I don't even say it's rediscovery, I think it's discovery, because you are forever changed by that trauma.
Absolutely.
Then it becomes, as difficult as it is, more of an adventure than punishment. And our journeys take as long as they take. I've heard your story, and I know how long it took you to get to that point and how many layers there were and experiences there were. But I do talk about the fact that our future is made up of new people, new experiences, new places, new adventures. And if you're buried, it's hard to embrace those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So can you take us back to November 2017 when those 6 minutes did change your life?
Yeah, I will. And this is always the difficult part of the story to tell. So we were at home. It was a Saturday night, 3 o'clock in the morning. I woke up because the dog was barking, and she was at the bottom of the garden, and she seemed quite sort of insistent in her barking. And my husband was not in bed next to me. He was having trouble sleeping, so he'd gone up to the family room to watch television. And essentially, to cut the story short, I alerted him to the fact that the dog was barking, but I wasn't too worried about it. You know, the hackles were not up on the back of my neck at that point. And I just popped back down, you know, to bed, took a glass of juice and hopped back into bed, grabbed my book. And as I was swinging my legs into the bed, I heard what I can only say was a commotion. It was a struggle. My husband had actually opened the door to call the dog in. And when he walked out onto the patio, he was stormed by two intruders, and our home was invaded by two armed men. And he struggled to try and slam the patio door closed, and they must have got a foot or an arm in the door. And that was the struggle that I heard. I have to date never, ever heard the single shot that he took to the heart. And so he was killed, one shot, immediate. They then went down to my son's bedroom. He was writing his finals in high school. It was November, so we write our exams the end of the year. And he was woken up at gunpoint, thrown down next to his dad's body. And during all of this, when I'd heard the commotion and before the intruders came into the bedroom wing, I had followed a plan that I'd given my children when they were very little. You know, I live in South Africa, in Johannesburg, a beautiful country, as you know, but an unpredictable and violent country. And I brought my children up from about the age of 4 with plan B. If I ever wake you up in the middle of the night and tell you to run, you go to the bathroom, you lock the door, don't ask me why, and don't come out until I tell you.
And even though I know I've heard you talk about plan B, even right now I still have the hairs on my arms are literally standing up on end, because what a thing to have to live with. It's really hard for a British woman to understand that you, when your mum says run, you run and you lock yourself wherever you can.
Yeah, and so I actually ran that plan, and it saved my life because I didn't stop and go to my husband's rescue, because what would be the point in that? I would have been overcome, raped, etc. How could I have helped him or us if that had happened? And don't for a minute think that I was working that out. I was running on automatic. I was running a plan. And I locked myself away in the bathroom. So I didn't wake up my son, because if I'd stopped, they would have got me. And I locked myself away. It was the only door in the house that had a key. I tried to lock my son and I in the bedroom section, and that door did not have a key. And our bedroom door didn't have a key. And there were 3 keys on the bathroom key ring. So fortunately, we had thick, solid Meranti wooden doors. And while I was in the bathroom, I picked up my cell phone as I ran to the bathroom, and I was able to make 6 emergency calls on speed dial to police, security services, my neighbor, my parents, ambulance, you know, medical support. I didn't have a clue what was going on. I made myself really small because they could have seen me through the window. And I knelt, crouched between the toilet and the dirty clothes basket. And then they came down, they brought my son down at gunpoint. I didn't know they had him at that point. I didn't know how many people were on my property. I had no idea if they were armed. I had not heard a gunshot. And so everything was, you know, unknown to me, except that I knew we were under attack. And they actually quite politely knocked on the door and asked a couple of times for me to open the door. And eventually my son said, "Mummy, they've got a gun." And that's the first time I knew they had him. And at that point, feminine intuition kicked in. So we've had the scenario plan that saved my life because I locked myself away. And now feminine intuition kicked in, and there was no way I was going to open that door. And I told them in no uncertain terms, I screamed over and over again for them to fuck off. I'd never used that word before, and I'm screaming it at the top of my lungs over and over again. At that point, they started trying to kick the door down, and my son tells me they were taking 3-meter flying leaps at the door. And the door, fortunately, was solid, and it didn't break. In hindsight, I think it was a combination of me not opening that door and my son's calm. Now, I could hear the tremor in his voice, but they couldn't. And he told them they might as well leave because I had already called for help. And I think that, and it took me about 9 months to work out what had possibly saved us. If I had opened that door, my 17-year-old son, who's 6'6", would have had everything to protect and everything to lose.
And the fear of him potentially witnessing you being raped.
Correct,
and
exactly.
Maybe murdered.
And that was something that I decided years and years and years ago, that I never wanted my husband or my sons to witness that, because I don't know how you erase that, not being able to help that person. So, I just think there's so many layers here on the deep psyche of what was going on. But suffice to say, my youngest son and I are still here today, and my eldest son, at the age of 22, was out partying at 3 a.m. and wasn't home. And we can only say, thank goodness he didn't walk in at that time, because he too is 6'6" and would have been a huge threat to the intruders. So they turned heel, they ran, they took smalls. Life is cheap. They took cell phones, laptops, computer bags, even stopped at my husband's body, took his watch off, tried to take his wedding ring. So that's really what happened, all in 6 minutes. From beginning to end, we could interrogate the alarm system. We know exactly how long it took them from the time they entered our property to the time they left. And it's just, I think, quite sobering when you think 6 minutes, that's all it took. And everything in our life changed. All our plans, our future, our hopes, our dreams were gone.
You and Simon had been married for quite a while, haven't you?
26 years, we'd been together 28 years, we'd been in the same house for 23 years, and we had these 2 beautiful children. So, I guess, 1,000 moments that I took for granted, believing there would be 1,000 more.
Yeah. So how do you and your boys, Ryan and Matthew, start to pick up the pieces and heal after losing their dad, your husband?
Yeah, well, with difficulty, and we're still dealing with it 3 years later. In different ways. And I think what's very interesting in terms of trauma recovery is how 3 people who were involved in the same trauma can have such a different experience of dealing with that trauma. And maybe that gives people hope, I'm not sure, but it has been incredibly interesting to see our very separate journeys, even though, for example, Matthew and I were in the same house at the same time. We were on 2 different sides of the same door. And that made our experience worlds apart. The fact that my eldest son wasn't home at the time, he was outside of what I call the fishbowl. He has survivor's guilt. He has all those things that we don't have to work through. We have a story. We were there. And then, I guess it's also the fact that I'm my age. I was 50 the year it happened and had done 25 years of personal development work myself. And I'm, my work is in human behavior. So for me, I had an underpinning of myself that my children at their young and tender age of, being late teens and early 20s didn't have the same life experience. So, I've had to overcome other things in my life that have made me maybe a little more resilient. But I think giving yourself time is very important. I decided I was going to grieve like an African woman.
What does that mean exactly?
African women wail.
Okay.
You know, they're keen and they wail. And I wanted to marinate myself in this grief because I didn't ever want to be in a situation where I had blocked it and then it would come back and revisit me in 10 years' time. So I really actively grieved. And for me, grieving is a verb, ing.
Yep.
There was walking, there was talking, there was praying, there was bargaining, there was swimming, there was writing, there was reading. There were so many ing words. I think, one can attempt to grieve in the corner of a couch with books, but I don't think that that's active grieving. And I was not a crier before this. I found it difficult to access my tears, but this broke me open. And I am so grateful that I was able to cry. I really am unbelievably grateful because it was a pressure release valve. It was a decompression. And I
Yeah, I
really,
think I agree. I think tears are very healing, really. And I think, as you're saying, you really need to feel to heal, don't you?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think there's a great need for rituals and ceremonies when there is trauma and loss. And we had never ever wanted to have a funeral, neither my husband nor I, with a coffin. And we landed up having a coffin for my husband because the minister who did the service had met with the three of us, and she said, "Your eldest son, who was not there, needs a coffin. He needs the reality that this has happened and your husband is never coming back." And it was the ritual of having the coffin in the room. And as a professional speaker, I gave one of the eulogies, which was the hardest thing I've ever had to do.
I was
But
going to say, I don't know how you could have done that.
I realized that I needed a coffin too, because I needed to be able to look at that coffin and know he wasn't coming back. Very tangible, concrete thing. And she said, "You're probably not going to remember much of this day, but you will remember walking up the aisle behind the coffin when it leaves the church." And for 3 months, that's all I could remember of that day was the walk. That's what I call it, the walk. But there's something that was really instrumental for me in getting up again. And it was a framework that I think your listeners might find really interesting. It was given to me on the night of my husband's funeral. And it was at about 10 o'clock at night, we had a wake, and at 10 o'clock, people started to leave. And that is when I started to cry. I'd been in so much shock in the first week that I had not cried a lot, but I started to cry because the reality of my situation just was hitting home. And the person standing next to me just happened to be a friend and psychologist. And she said, "Nix, what's going on for you right now?" And I said, "This just feels like the end. It feels like a full stop in my life. And it's the end of all our hopes and our dreams of our future." And she said, "Can I try and encourage you to see if you can turn that full stop into a comma, into a pause? It's not the end of your life. It's a pause in your life." But she followed it with something really important. She said, "It's a comma and dot, dot, dot. And the dots are the future that you are going to create for yourself." Now, that framework, I'm very visual, and that framework was something I could grab onto. And I don't know if she ever realized how important what she was saying was going to become in my life. But she tasked me with taking the responsibility for my own healing and my own rescue and my own growth. And
it's like writing your future in pen or writing your future in pencil. We can rub it out and actually, make it something different. It's not final.
yes, and it's been such a powerful analogy that I've been able to share with so many people. And it really has helped me, that taking responsibility for creating your new life. It's not just finding yourself again, but it's actually actively looking for the new people who walk into your life, looking for the new experiences, saying yes to things that maybe you never said yes to before, which sometimes can be deeply uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable, very scary, but that's how we grow, isn't it? That's how we expand ourselves.
Especially when you've had this, it felt like the skin had been ripped right off me, and I was so red and raw. And yet there was a part of me that just wanted to survive this, even though I didn't barely breathe for a year. And I had so many symptoms of shock and stress and grief. And, it was very physical, very emotional. I mean, I felt so vulnerable and so real,
Yes,
actually.
I think my mum described it when my dad died. She was 58. She just said, I feel so raw. I just feel so raw. Sorry, that's my co-host Alfie barking. We just ignore him. Listeners will know he does make an appearance now and again.
Yeah. So I just always think that we do have a choice. And I did have a choice. And it can be very easy to stay in the cocoon of your nearest and dearest best friends and closest family members. But for me to really heal, because what was I being tasked with through this situation? To discover who is Nikki without Simon, with whom I've been for 28 years. And you start to view yourself through that lens, that person's lens. And it's great. But when he's not there, what then? How do I see myself? And I know we shouldn't only see ourselves through other people's lenses, but we tend to see ourselves through the lenses of the people we spend the most time with. So that was the challenge. That was the adventure of who is Nikki without Simon. And in order to discover that, I had to be with people who didn't hold me victim in the space of you're Simon's widow.
Yes.
I needed to step into environments where I was just Nikki.
Yeah. And you managed to find those?
I did. I think because I was open. It's hard, because say, for example, about 18 months after my husband died, I went on a date. And that was very hard for me, but it was even harder for my eldest son. He just really battled with it. And I had to sit him down and say, no one's ever going to come in between you and me. And no one's ever going to take your dad's place. But I can't discover myself if I don't have new mirrors in which to see me reflected back at me.
Absolutely.
And so this is a very scary journey, but also very exciting on another level. So the most exciting and the most exhilarating and the most terrifying adventure all at once.
A lot of emotions, it's fair to say, all flying off in one direction or many directions. So it's not only that you lost your husband, but you then had to make a living as well. You had to look at how you're going to survive and look after these two boys as well.
Yeah, so, I'm a solopreneur like you. And so I am my business. I am my brand. And because my husband was murdered in middle to late November, the speaking calendar for me slows down at that point from December to about mid-January. And I went back. So I took about 2 months off. And then people said to me at about sort of mid-Jan to end Jan the following year, gosh, you've come back to work so quickly. And I said, actually, no. If you're employed, you only get 3 days of compassionate leave. I took 2 months. So actually, I was quite privileged. But it did impact on my body. It impacted on my brain. It impacted on my brand and my ability to work because I had severe ADD and I'd never had that before. But the trauma really affected my ability to concentrate, and my short-term working memory was shot. Old memories, it was easy to pull through. And that was my biggest challenge as a professional speaker, was that I knew that when I stood up in front of an audience, there was every possibility that I would lose my place in my presentation and not be able to find my words. Because
as a speaker, that's never good, really, is it?
And that happened to me on a regular basis in many situations. I'd be, and that's trauma. I'd come back from having dinner with a few people or something, and I'd go, what an interesting discussion about X. Who the hell did I have it with? Or what an interesting conversation with so-and-so. What the hell were we talking about? I had these gaps that came and made me feel really out of control. That was probably the scariest thing for me, was that my processing power in my brain, my RAM, was down to about 20%. I was barely functional, and yet I had to get up every day and work to make a living. So I think work was also good for me because it was the only place where anything felt familiar. And so I'm very grateful that I had work, and very grateful that I had clients who had given me the space and then supported me, and I could get back on my bicycle. And then, of course, they started asking me to share my story.
Yes.
And that was really tough to begin with. And it made me very angry because I was trying to work out what could I share that was worth sharing in this devastating story. And I realized that there were things that I had learned that I could share.
Yeah, you say that you use it for human potential. So could you expand a little bit on that? What do you mean by that, using your story for human potential?
Yep. So this new book that I've written is called Future Proof Yourself. And it really is a book about dancing with disruption. And I believe that we actually dance with disruption and change more than we think as human beings. You know, you go through babyhood, childhood, teens, you become an adult, you fall in love, you fall out of love, you get divorced, you get married, you have children. All of these things are actually disruptive in our lives. New jobs are disruptive, even for all the right reasons, changing town, moving country. And then we have, of course, the disruption that's coming with technology and the new world of work, the fourth industrial revolution. So we're actually living in a world of disruption. So I am using these learnings through my walk with disruption, my walk with change and loss and grief, to help people, especially during this time of COVID, to deal with, even if they haven't lost a family member or a friend or a colleague, just their loss of control. They are grieving that too. So I think understanding the grieving process, having walked the journey in what I call the shadowlands, has helped me to help a lot of people to understand where they find themselves and to give them tools to pull themselves out of that deep, dark hole that they may have fallen into.
And I'm very lucky. I have been able to read an advanced copy, and it is a fantastic guide. And I think it's one of those books that you can just dip in and dip out of whenever the need comes. But yeah, grief is a weird thing, because it's not just grieving the person or the loss of job. It's also grieving what could have been, you know, all the dreams that you had and how we imagine our life will be. So that, I think, is a huge part of the loss as well, isn't it?
Yes, you've lost your future, the journey with that person. And one of the things when I um, when I developed this collateral beauty versus collateral damage exercise, it was in the lead up to the first presentation I gave about what had happened. And I got so angry, and I went, there's just collateral damage. And I folded a piece of paper in half, and I wrote collateral damage on one side, collateral beauty on the other. And stream of consciousness, everything that came to mind on the damage side, I just wrote down, including what you've just said, that I had lost the future co-grandparent of my future grandchildren. So apart from the fact that I'd lost my husband, my children had lost their father, and we lost our home in the process too, because my youngest could never come home and sleep in the house again. So we were dealing with a lot of loss and a lot of change. And I wrote down all of those things, including everything in the future. And that went on for 2.5 pages. And then I got to the end of everything I could think of. And then I thought, well, maybe there's a couple of things I can write on the collateral beauty side of the page. And I blew myself away. And it's a tool I share with everyone. 5 pages later, I stopped writing about the collateral beauty that had come through my husband.
More beauty than damage.
It shifted my perspective, Madeleine, completely on this journey of disruption that we go through in many different ways, whether it's a loss of a person, a relationship, your health, your wealth, a job. Loss comes in so many different guises. But if along the journey we find a way to step back from the window pane of loss and regain perspective, it's much easier to journey forward and embrace the newness. Otherwise, we can get stuck in a place. And, we have to visit all those negative emotions. We need to wallow in them, and we need to work through them. But the worst thing you can do is shove them under a rug and not deal with them, because then they fester and they come out in ever more destructive ways.
But it sounds like you're really saying just surrender to the facts and accept, which is not an easy job for people to do.
No, in fact, it's so difficult. There's no one way to do this. And I think on one level, it's surrendering and accepting. And on another level, it's fighting for your life.
Yes.
Even if you're not the one who's been physically wounded, you're fighting for your psyche, you're fighting for your sanity, you're fighting with every ounce of your being to show up in the world every day, to actually want to be in the world every day. It's a fight. It is a fight. And you're exhausted. So you really are on the back foot. So I think so much of it has to do with your just that inner core, that will to live, that resilience that maybe you have been able to build up through the years, that you access it and you're able to say to yourself, and I think this is important, can you look back on your life and think of any other moments in your life where you also faced a full stop? And what happened? Did you remain as a full stop in that instance? Or did you also see that as a comma? And it was interesting that I could look back in my life and I could pinpoint 3 or 4 different occasions where I could have chosen a full stop, and not knowing the comma full stop analogy, I actually had chosen the comma. And I think some people maybe do find it easier than others to work through stuff. I think it does depend on personality type sometimes. I think it depends on your life experience. I think it depends on your toolkit. What tools are in that toolkit and what experiences are in that knapsack of life that will help you get out of this. And I guess as well, your support structure. And I have been very blessed to have a close family and amazing friends. But I think you can have all of that and still not recover. Absolutely. So much of it comes back to your choice. And I'm a real fan of Edith Eger's books, and how she talks about the fact that you have to participate in your own rescue. People can throw you life rafts and rope and can be there for you. But if you don't want to save yourself, nobody can save you.
And if anyone's listening doesn't know of Dr. Edith Eger, she is a Holocaust survivor and a psychotherapist, and her books are called The Choice and the Gift, and it's choosing to live her life as best as she can, and her story is just incredible.
Phenomenal woman, really. And, and she's also spent her whole life working through her trauma, as you will also dance with your trauma for the rest of your life, as I will dance with my trauma for the rest of my life. But as we evolve and grow and delayer, because I think it is like an onion, we're coming at it from a different perspective and a different place every time.
And we become better dancers and the dance changes.
I think so. And do I still have, off days? Yes, I do. But they are less frequent and the spaces between them are longer. And I have to say, the one thing, going back to crying, I actually miss all the crying. Isn't that? Because I'm not a natural crier. And I think that was just the most amazing experience for me, to have 2 and a bit years where I cried so much, so often. I didn't know that the body could hold so much water.
Yes, I resonates with me completely. I have worked with a shaman for many years, a man named Imaho, and I used to cry and cry and cry, and he just said they're a gift, and I used to be so ashamed of crying. He said they're a gift to be able to cry those tears. They are so healing for you and for other people. So never worry about crying. Crying is really good.
But I wish I knew where the button was, the cry button now. So I actually sometimes listen to music. That's the thing, like something like The Gladiator, Now We Are Free.
Okay.
I just have to watch that movie and I'll cry for 2 hours. But that really gets me in touch with my grief.
But that's good. That's self-care, recognizing that you need that release, and sometimes What would you say has been the greatest learning for you out of all of this?
I think that we have to examine whether we are being galvanized and energized by fear or curiosity. And I think that my curiosity about what next in my life has outweighed my fear. So that has been a really interesting thing. And as Nan said, life shrinks and expands in direct proportion to one's courage. And I say that life shrinks and expands in direct proportion to one's courage and curiosity. If you want to see beyond the hill, you've got to work to get over the hill. If you want to see beyond your grief, you've got to work through that grief and that pain to see what's on the other side. But you don't have to wait. I think if you're prepared to do the work and process, you will see amazing things on the way to the other side of grief.
Yes, it is the journey and the destination, isn't it? Absolutely. Nikki, I could speak to you.
Waiting, for the end point. And there isn't an end point. So maybe that's a really big learning.
Thank you so much, Nikki. I could speak to you all day listening to you. You are a wise, wise woman, and I just thank you for sharing your wisdom with the world. Thank you for being a guest on the show.
Thank you, Madeleine, and thank you for your inspiration on my journey too.
Unbroken, healing through storytelling.